Do you know what's the worst thing you could possibly do? It's being a generalist. And that's why today we have Quinn. And he is an agency growth advisor, and he has 17 years of agency experience, including as Scorpion's CMO, where he helped grow revenue from $20 million to $150 million in 6 years. And he wants to tell us that it's important to pick a winning niche so you can sell like crazy and grow tenfold. He just published his best-selling book, Anyone, Not Everyone, a proven system for agencies to escape founder-led sales. Today, he helps digital agency founders scale revenue and profits with deep specialization. Now, the first question I have for you is, what's the secret to your success? And does it have anything to do with picking a winning niche? Welcome to Awakened Titans podcast with Lily Patrascu. Mind-blowing conversations with influential business titans sharing how you can manifest abundance, love, joy, success through quantum awakening, quantum manifestation, quantum healing, quantum miracles, exponential business growth, and innovative products and services.
Well, thank you, Lily, for having me on the show. I am super excited to be here and to spend some time with you and your audience. And so repeat the question, because I had so many thoughts right when you said, but if you wouldn't mind repeating, please.
Yes. What's the secret to your success? And does it have anything to do with picking a winning niche?
Well, let me tell you a quick story about my background. My last company, as you mentioned, was a company called Scorpion. And I was hired as a chief marketing officer there. And it was a big role for me because previously in my career, I'd never had the C-level title. I'd always been a director or a vice president, but this was my first C-level position as a chief marketing officer. And I came into the business as a team of one. And as you mentioned, over the next 6 years, I helped to grow the business from 20 million to 150 million. I grew my team from just me to a team of 30 people. We grew the entire company from 100 people to 1,000 people, and we grew the list of clients from 1,000 to 14,000 clients. So just an amazing transformation of my career as well as the business that I worked at. And I think the big thing that was for me when I joined that business back then as an employee, I really took the mindset of an owner. Right. And so I was not the owner of the business. I was not the founder or anything like that. I was just an executive on the executive team. My job was to fill a functional role, but I saw myself as an owner stepping into that role, the owner of the business, although I wasn't that. And so as a result of that belief or that identity that, hey, I was an owner here, I wanted to act like an owner. And so therefore, I would do things to help the business grow as if I was the owner. Simple things like I would work very hard. I would work extra long hours. I would go the extra mile. And it turns out that those things ultimately helped the business to succeed. Now, the thing about niching down and becoming what I call a vertical market specialist, that was something that was already in existence at the company, but it was kind of like lightning in a bottle. They hadn't realized what they had. So when I came in, we took that idea of focusing on a niche or a vertical market, and we were able to really scale up the business in those 6 or 7 short years.
Thank you. So does that mean that, for example, let's say I'm a book publisher, okay? And at the moment, I help multiple types of people. Coaches, property investors. So are you suggesting that someone like me, instead of doing that, I could specialize in helping only property investors, for example, or only investors to publish?
Sure.
And will that help me grow? Just as an example, in terms of kind of applying what you're suggesting here, in terms of picking a winning niche.
So it's a great question. And I'll answer your specific question first, but then secondarily, there's an unspoken question I think you have. To answer your question, if you were just going to focus on property owners, as an example, as you shared, as a book publisher, yes, you would be able to grow faster because you are a niche down specialist, right? You understand the business of helping publishers or helping authors to launch books in that specific vertical market. So yes, as a result of that, you would build a reputation as an expert. You'd probably get really good at serving that one specific client. You get great results for them. As a result of that, you could charge more prices. You're more profitable. All of those great things. So yes, to the first question. The second question, which I think is again an implied question, which is, would it make sense for me to actually do that and turn away from all the rest of the other different types of businesses? And the way to answer that question is to look at, it's a math problem. And what I mean by that is there enough real estate or businesses within that specific niche you're considering to target who have the problem that you solve, i.e. an author who wants to launch? Is there enough of them for me to consider myself successful doing the math of, well, I'm not going to sell my services to 100% of them, but maybe 5%, 7%. And what's the average revenue per client? You do all that math and you figure out, well, that's a pretty good business. That would make me really happy. Then it may make sense. I'll give you an example. So with some real numbers. So in the United States, there are 157,000 plumbing businesses today. Now, I don't know how many of those are writing books, but I'll just say, if you are a business that services plumbers and you were, as a result of focusing and niching down, you were able to close 1% of the 157,000, that means that you would have 1,570 plumbing clients. Now, in the agency business, the industry I come from, it's a recurring business model. So you make money every month. It's not a project-based. But let's just say that you are an agency and you charge $10,000 a year in this 1% of this big market of plumbers. You're able to make $15.7 million just by serving 1% of the market every single year. And you probably get really good at servicing that same market because you're doing it over and over, which means that your product gets better, you're able to charge more, you're able to be much more process driven, which means your profits are great. So that's the philosophy of the approach behind this.
Okay, so how can you establish if there are enough people in the market to serve?
Great.
And how to choose that particular winning niche that doesn't have like high competition, that is not currently served by so many people that could potentially compete with that?
It's a great question. So the first question, or there's two questions. To answer your first question about how do you find out, well, how many of these businesses are there out there? The reality is that there's not that one source of truth. You kind of have to triangulate, right? There is also a correlation between the size of the business and how much data is available about those businesses. So for instance, if you're targeting large enterprise companies, they tend to have a big, what they call digital footprint. There's a lot of data about the number of employees, revenue, margins, all of those things. But if you're targeting small mom and pop businesses, there's not a lot of great data. And so as a result of that, it is, as a founder or as a business owner, you kind of have to do the best you can to get your arms around whatever data is available and then make a qualitative decision about whether or not it makes sense to focus in on this specific market. But one rule of thumb is success should look like 3 to 5% of the what they call total addressable market. And that is the total number of businesses in the industry or the niche you serve. That if you were to have them as clients, that would be 3 to 5%. That would be a good percentage of the market. That'd be a reasonable percentage of the market to get through focusing down.
Thank you. Am I not missing out by focusing in on one tiny market?
Are you not missing out? I mean, so I think you bring up an interesting point, Lily, which is that, you and me and anyone here listening are human, which means we have biases. And the bias that this idea of narrowing your focus challenges, which is that we don't want to cut off any opportunities, right? Most people get into business. I imagine you got into business by saying yes, I'm willing to help you as an author to do a book deal. I'll help you publish it. It's going to be amazing. And that's how you get into business. And that's how you become successful. Maybe you hire employees and you have an office and all these great things. But the challenge is for those ambitious entrepreneurs who want to create a big business, saying yes to everybody eventually becomes the thing that holds them back. Because if they're saying yes to everybody, that means they're doing everything slightly different. Every client is a little bit bespoke, right? If you're servicing 15 different industries. All of those industries or niches have different needs. They want a different product, so on and so forth. So typically, the typical life cycle of a business owner who becomes niche down is they start off as what I call a generalist. You opened up with this idea of being a generalist. It's actually not that bad to be a generalist to start, right? There's a famous guy in the software space. His name's Paul Graham, and he says that when he coaches small businesses, he says it's better to do things that don't scale to start. What that means is do a lot of things that maybe require a lot of effort, a lot of service, a lot of different types of clients, because over time you begin to understand what is your strength, what does the market truly want, what are you good at, what are people willing to pay you for? And then once you have that data, that's a good time to really start to focus your business down.
Thank you. Does this make sense only for digital agencies that have like a recurring kind of income? Or does it make sense for an entrepreneur like me that perhaps I don't need 10 years to charge 10 grand a month, 10 grand a year. I could just like charge 100 grand in one go. And that way it could make sense. But how would I even know, for example, how many, I don't know, let's say if I was to choose lawyers or property investors or I don't know, medical people, how would I even know how many of those people actually want to do books so I can establish my real?
Sure. So if I was going to try to figure that out, I would go and do some research into seeing how many attorneys wrote a book in the last 12 to 24 months. Right? What is the volume of attorneys? And if you could assume that, well, if 1,000 attorneys wrote a book in the last year, it's likely that another 1,000 or more are going to write one in this next year, especially with how publishing is evolving. So I would use that as a strong signal to say, look, the total addressable market is 1,000 attorneys or more. That means that I can go into the market, and if I'm really aggressive and I find a lot of these attorneys, maybe I can close 30 to 100 of them. And at $100,000 a pop, it's pretty good revenue.
Okay. How do you get that number? Like how do you find out how many people have written a book in the last whatever time frame?
It's a great question. I don't have as much, although I'm an author now, I don't have as much familiarity with the publishing business to understand. But I imagine there are some data sources that will tell you, like who are writing books. But again, I have not done that research. And if I was to do that research and came across the fact that this is not an easy thing to figure out and there's not good data on it, that would probably dissuade me from narrowing my niche based on a hunch, because I'd want some data to support that.
Okay. So how would you recommend that every single digital agency picks a winning niche, or that they don't have to do that because it depends on what they really want to do?
Yeah. So the typical, as I mentioned, the typical life cycle of an agency is you start off as a generalist, you get into business, you say yes to everybody, you say yes to people, friends from high school, to your local neighbors, local businesses, say yes to everybody. The problem that these businesses get into is that they do what's called the peanut butter marketing strategy, which is they do a little bit of marketing across a lot of different platforms, and they really struggle with acquiring new clients. As a result, they lean very heavily on the founder and the founder's ability to generate referrals. Maybe they get some word of mouth, but they still are staying small because no one knows who they are outside of the founder's circle. That is typically when the founder says, well, let's go spend some more money on Facebook to generate some ads. And when that fails, then they say, okay, it's probably time for me to niche down and become specific on a vertical market. I have seen agencies, and I know agency founders who run a generalist agency, meaning they do SEO, and they do SEO for any type of business, and they are successful. It is rare, though, because you have to be extremely good at process, right? This particular guy I'm thinking about, he's the founder of a very successful SEO agency, and he has every single client has what they call an SOP, a standard operating procedure, where his company's employees know exactly what to do every step of the way. He's taken a lot of the variability out of his business, despite being a generalist. So in other words, the process that an e-commerce business comes in is the same process that a doctor or a dentist would come into his business. And so he's been really successful in that. However, for the vast majority of us humans, that becomes very difficult to do at scale. Then the argument for becoming a vertical market specialist makes a lot of sense. Now, should everybody do it? I think if you want to build a business that grows faster, that has better margins, that is more likely to be acquired, that is not going to be founder-led, yes, I think it's a great way to build a business that is ultimately sellable if you want to sell.
Thank you. For businesses like mine, for example, where at the moment there are thousands of publishers, is it a good idea to specialize, or is it a good idea to stay a generalist?
Well, I would say it depends on whether or not you're having challenges on your ability to grow, right? It may be that you don't need to specialize because you already have a lot of word of mouth and you have a great brand in the market. But for most of us who don't have the luxury of that, one of the ways that you could generate more awareness and better positioning is by becoming a vertical market specialist. But again, it goes back to, does it make sense to do that? Is there a market that's big enough? So one way to specialize potentially, just kind of speaking off the cuff here, is maybe not all the way down into, let's say, lawyers, but maybe service-based businesses, a whole category of businesses, which could be anything from property, developers to attorneys to CPAs to dentists, right? Service providers. Maybe one altitude as far as how specific you want to get. You're still specializing in their world, but maybe not all the way down to the attorney level would be a way to explore it, I think.
Thank you. How did you come up with this idea that picking a niche is a lot better than being a generalist?
That's a great question. So I had been in the agency space. I've been in the agency space about 18 years now. And I made my way up as a salesperson and then a sales manager. And every agency that I worked at was what I call founder-led, which means, I'll give you an example. One of the agencies that I worked at, it was founded by the ex-CEO of MySpace. Now, MySpace is like Facebook today, but it was famous back in 2005 to 2007. And this founder, so he was the CEO of MySpace. He left MySpace. He started his own agency, and guess what he did? He contacted all of the big advertisers from MySpace that he knew, and he built this great agency. He would pick up his phone, make a phone call that would turn into a warm lead for his agency, and then we would close that lead for six figures. It was a great business. The other agency I worked for also was very founder-led. That founder graduated from the Harvard Business School. Okay, he had a great network of CEOs, CMOs, and so on and so forth. At this point in my career, I began to believe, or I had evidence that the way to start a great service-based business is that you have to have a founder who's charismatic and has a great network. That's how you grow. All of that changed when I started at Scorpion, because Scorpion had a 6-person sales team. Attorneys, you mentioned attorneys would call us to the sales team and they'd want to talk to us about that. And in many cases, they would do what's called a one-call close. The attorney would call in, salesperson would close them on a 12-month agreement on that very first phone call. What I found was fascinating was that those attorneys didn't ask who the founder was, didn't care who the founder was. That was never a part of the conversation. It wasn't a part of their buying criteria. What these attorneys cared about was, are you a specialist in solving my specific problem, and who else have you solved it for? Because I need to fix this problem, right? It was never about the founder. And it turns out that the specialization, being an expert in a vertical market, was more important than having that charismatic founder. And that was sort of the kernel that helped us to see that, hey, we could really scale this business up because we don't have to depend on the founder. The founder was never, when I was there, he was not involved in sales. He was not involved in marketing. He was doing other things. And at the same time, building a $150 million business. Pretty amazing.
Thank you. I think one important differentiator when you're targeting a very niche group is that the messaging changes dramatically, right? Like you feel called out. You feel like, okay, if you're a lawyer, or if you're a, I don't know, property investor, if you're a this, if you're a that, then it's like, you know how that person feels on a deeper level. And that's why you're able to directly speak to the fears, the desires, the wants, the needs of that particular person, and the failures perhaps they've had in the past, And so I wonder, in terms of messaging, what's different?
Yes. Yes. Gosh, it's so important what you're talking about, Lily. So, in the franchise industry, I'll give you an example of how important this is. There's something that is called, now it's escaping me, but there is a document that every franchise has to have. And if I was selling into a franchise, we used to do this at Scorpion, and oh, let's call it MDF, marketing development funds. If I was selling to a franchise and they'd say, well, where do these funds come from, the MDF? And as a seller, I would say, well, what's an MDF? All of a sudden I would be outed out as an outsider, right? And they would know, okay, this person doesn't know our industry, next. We don't want to talk to you anymore. And so there is something that's called insider language. It's very obvious, right? So attorneys talk about cases, dentists talked about patients, right? So that's a very simple way to do it. But you definitely want to be able to speak their language in your marketing materials and your sales calls so that you can, again, reinforce this positioning that you are an expert. There are two great ways to understand the insider language. The first one is go to one of their conferences, right? So if you're targeting attorneys, go to an attorney conference where there's only attorneys and go and sit in their sessions and learn from them, learn about about their world, the challenges they're facing. And you're going to pick up in a ton of language that they use on a day-to-day basis. You'll become an expert really quickly. That's number one. Number two, find a subject matter expert, someone who sells to attorneys or whatever that vertical market is for you, someone who already has those relationships, and interview them to understand, hey, what is the language I should be using? What are the key pain points that are specific to this vertical market that I should know about? And it's by interviewing this ICP or I'm sorry, ICP of it, you're a subject matter expert, that you will get really great insights that you could reflect in your marketing and your sales to, again, reinforce the fact that you are an insider.
Thank you. Do you leverage branding archetypes in your messaging? And if yes, how do you correctly choose the branding archetype of client that is likely to be attracted to your messaging?
Well, that's the benefit. Yes. And that is the benefit of being very specific on who you're targeting. So if you're targeting on one level, very high level, service-based business, it can be a very generic archetype, or you have to have a lot of them. Or if you're just targeting attorneys or personal injury attorneys, which, by the way, are very different from family law attorneys. They're very different people, right? And so by being more specific, you could have a much richer buyer persona, or these different archetypes that you could use to be very compelling and relevant in your marketing.
Thank you. What else do entrepreneurs need to know about anyone, not everyone, your book?
Yes. Thank you, Lily. So Anyone, Not Everyone is really the brainchild, if you will. It's the book I wish I had when I was starting off in my career as a marketer and as a salesperson. It is a 5-step roadmap from going from a generalist to a vertical market specialist that is highly respected and growing very quickly. So it gives you those 5 steps. It's very actionable. It also comes, there's a free online workbook, as well as your listeners, Lily, can get the audiobook for free by going to anyoneNotEveryone.com right now, and you can get access to the audiobook.
Thank you. Tell us about the 5 steps.
Sure, absolutely. Well, I'll bulk it into 3 phases because it's much easier to talk about that. The first one is exactly what we're talking about, which is finding focus, which is going back into your book of business. If you and I were working together and you said, "Hey, Corey, where do I focus my publishing company, my services?" Well, the first place we would look is we would go into your book of business. There's a tremendous amount of wisdom in the current book of business that you have. You have clients, current clients, previous clients. You can look at, where did you have the most impact with your current book of business? Where do you have the most revenue? Where are you getting referrals? Right? So you go into your current book of business, extract all that great wisdom as an indicator. Then you would also do things more qualitative analysis. Maybe you have a team. What are the people on your team? Who do they like working with? If they had to choose one vertical, who would they choose? And then the last step of the focus phase is to go and do that market analysis. How big is that addressable market? Does it really justify us targeting, right? If you're going to climb the ladder of success, you want to make sure the ladder is resting against the right building. So that's the first one. The second one is positioning. So the positioning is really about, Okay, I've decided to focus on attorneys. There's a lot of them. We have a lot of great case studies. We feel really good about this. We do great work in this area. Now we go in and we want to position ourselves as that vertical market specialist. The way we do that, the best way to do it is to go in and interview attorney clients, understand how and why they bought from you. What were they doing before they chose you? What were the pain points? All of that work will really help to guide your messaging. You also want to do some competitive analysis. You mentioned earlier about, what if there's a tremendous amount of competitors? If you are selling to a buyer, they're going to compare you to other alternatives. So you want to understand who you're being compared to so you can have really crisp and unique differentiated messaging. So that's phase 2, is creating that great messaging. The third phase is going out and attracting clients in this vertical market. There's 3 legs to that stool. First one is inbound marketing. Second one is outbound marketing. And the third one is relationship-based marketing. So in the book, go through into great depth about how to actually get more clients once you've identified which vertical you want and you've positioned yourself for that vertical market.
Wow, that seems so fascinating. Where can entrepreneurs go to get this book? Is it anyoneNotEveryone.com? Yes?
That's it. Exactly. And when you get there, you'll have access to the audiobook for free. They can start listening right now, as well as the digital workbook, which includes worksheets and checklists and videos and all this really great stuff. It's all free. It's all available right now. And you can start to go through the 5 steps and start to get the benefit from them literally today.
Thank you. What's your message to entrepreneurs worldwide?
So I think if you are ambitious, I would say take the advice of Steve Martin, who is a sort of a comedian, very well known, was in a lot of movies in the 80s and 90s. He's very well respected around the fact that he is a true comedian. He's a real artist. And he was interviewed on the Tony Rose show, and Tony Rose asked him, what's the secret to your success? And he says, well, the secret to my success is typically what people don't want to hear, which is that you want to be so good that they can't ignore you. What that means is hone your craft, become the best of the world at what you do, and then you will be impossible to ignore.
Follow us for more interviews with world's most influential business titans, providing you with the insights to awaken to your full potential, so you can get paid to be yourself, find true happiness, and manifest anything you desire.